Our next participant is Attorney Aaron Siri. Aaron represents Dr. Patricia Lee, a very brave and courageous physician like all the people sitting before you here today that simply could not remain silent any longer and wrote to the agencies about what she was seeing in her practice. And of course, the agencies, as they've done across the board here, pretty much ignored her. So, Mr. Siri.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank everybody for sharing their stories. I know it cannot be easy to do so. My firm of over 20 professionals has represented individuals injured by vaccines for many years. And so we're very familiar with these heartbreaking stories, and I empathize with every one of you. While we've been representing people for vaccine injury for quite a while, it wasn't until the COVID-19 vaccine that our phones, emails, form submissions have reached an avalanche of submissions. If we could actually sue the pharmaceutical companies for all those injuries, it would actually be humanly impossible for my firm, or I think the collective efforts of all attorneys around the country that handle vaccine injury cases, which are about 100 attorneys right now, to handle all of those matters. As things stand right now, you can't sue Pfizer, J&J, or Moderna for any of the injuries. You can't bring a claim in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program either. You're relegated to a program called CICP, which has a standard of proof that makes it almost impossible to obtain compensation. And even if you do prevail, the amount of compensation is de minimis for the most part. Among the folks that have contacted our firm are many physicians from across the country who themselves have suffered vaccine injuries. I've spoken to many of them, and while their stories vary, their injuries vary, there are three common themes that they all convey. The first one is that, and we heard a lot of you express the same here today, is that after they suffered an injury, they went to the very medical establishment that they work in to go and get treatment. And even though they themselves were physicians, the initial reaction they often got was one of, "We don't believe you." Often they were told it was psychological, referred to counseling, instead of treating the injuries that were being presented. And these are physicians. A lot of times they had to go to physicians that they went to medical school with or who they had worked with, those colleagues who would believe them. The other common theme is that they, for the most part, report that they submitted a VAERS report, that they had to do it, and often their physicians didn't, and that after submitting the VAERS reports, like many of you, they expected a phone call that never came. And a lot of them explain how they then would take the initiative to directly contact the CDC or the FDA or public health authorities themselves. And again, it was either silence or after an exchange of some nature, the end result was typically the same. Don't worry. VAERS is not seeing this safety problem, so it's not an issue. Nothing to see here. Your issue is not an issue because it's not an issue in VAERS. One of the things that I often ask physicians who contact the firm is, will you make public the failing of our public health agencies? And that's often has the same reaction as well. And that is one of immense fear. The fear of retaliation from public health officials and the medical establishment, if they come forward with even their own story of their own injury, is palpable. No physician agreed to go forward until, as you pointed out, Senator, Dr. Patricia Lee, who herself was not injured by a vaccine, but as a matter of conscience, she simply could no longer sit idly by after seeing a series of extraordinarily serious injuries after COVID vaccinations. She did what every other physician should do. She reported those series of cases to VAERS. She was expecting that somebody would contact her. And nobody did. And not just any cases. A young woman who's pregnant, became paraplegic, lived just long enough to have her baby and die a month later. 2 other young women who lost most of their small intestines. Incredibly devastating injuries. She waited for the call that never came. And when it didn't come, she did what many of you did. She wrote a letter directly to the CDC and the FDA. This letter right here. She sent it on September 28, 2021. It's publicly available. You can read what she sent them. She waited 1 day, 2 days, 7 days. No response. On the 8th day, my firm sent a letter asking the FDA and CDC, are you really going to ignore this mainstream pediatrician trained at Harvard and Georgetown medical centers who is telling you about serious injuries from this product? They did respond to her eventually. And they even actually had a meeting with her. And what did they tell her? Nothing to see. There's no safety signal in VAERS, so everything is fine. The most incredible part of that meeting is after Dr. Patricia Lee relayed the stories in detail that would bring tears to most folks' eyes. She asked Dr. Marks and the other 5 representatives from the FDA and CDC, do you have any questions? Exactly. That's exactly what she got, the silence that you hear. Until eventually, Dr. Marks did begin to speak and explain to her, VAERS is a wonderful system and we're not seeing safety signals. Everything's fine. The act of bravery by Dr. Patricia Lee resulted in other physicians, or at least was the catalyst in other physicians and others reaching out to our firm with similar stories and now wanting and agreeing to go public. And on October 27, 2021, we sent this letter to the FDA, CDC, and NIH. And in this letter, we attach 11 declarations from physicians detailing similar catastrophic injuries from COVID-19 vaccines as detailed by Dr. Lee. We got a response. It's right here, and we've made it publicly available. You can find it. Not a single question about the injuries from our health authorities. The same retort. Everything's fine. VAERS says it's safe. Nothing to see here. What I'd like to also point out about these declarations is that most of the physicians, despite not being able to work anymore, despite they themselves being catastrophically injured, still would not put their names out publicly. Their declarations have their names and their identities redacted, because even though they can't even engage in their normal medical practice, they still have that palpable fear of retaliation from the medical profession and from public health authorities. For those who did put their names out there, hopefully it will encourage other physicians, and that snowball will hopefully lead to recognition, and that is what is the first step to addressing the injuries everybody's described here today. Until public health authorities acknowledge these injuries, you can't seek treatment. And I would add that It's also why everybody sitting here today, all of the physicians and the medical professionals, PhDs who are attending here today are putting, they know, we know, they're putting their careers on the line to come here and do this. And I'm sure that everybody is deeply appreciative that you guys are doing that. It should not be that any physician should have to, quote unquote, risk it all just to advocate for their patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siri. By the way, don't feel like you've been isolated in getting non-response responses. I've sent out 25 oversight letters, and when I rarely get a response. When I do, it's a non-response, as you and Dr. Lee have received as well.